security. You are isolated, moving fast, and completely in control. But that steel box is a fragile barrier. In his early 20s, a young man living outside Manchester, New Hampshire, thought he was perfectly safe driving his new date out of town. They had met at his grandmother's church. After a successful first date of a movie and dinner, he suggested a drive down a dark, winding 2-lane road to keep the conversation going. Out of nowhere, the conversation stopped. The passenger began speaking at a frantic, impossible pace. It wasn't English. It sounded like a rapid, mumbled French, tumbling out of her mouth in an aggressive blur. Assuming it was a bizarre joke, he looked over. Her eyes had rolled completely back into her skull, leaving only the white sclera visible. Her head began to vibrate rapidly. Terrified she was having a seizure, the driver swerved, narrowly avoiding a concrete barrier, and slammed the car into park on the shoulder. He fumbled for his phone to dial 911. Then, just as abruptly as the episode began, it ended. Her mouth snapped shut. Her eyes returned to normal, blinking away the trance. She gave him a wide, wild stare, threw open the passenger door, and sprinted full speed into the pitch-black woods. The police searched the tree line and took his frantic statement, but they found nothing. In the days that followed, her Instagram account vanished. Her phone number was erased. No one at the close-knit church had any record of her ever attending. She was completely gone. A locked car doesn't keep the unknown out. If the threat is already sitting in the passenger seat, the vehicle simply becomes a sealed cage, traveling at 60 miles an hour. Sometimes the threat is entirely outside the glass. When you cross into the empty stretches of the Nevada desert, the environment itself is incredibly hostile, isolating drivers by hundreds of miles. A driver returning from a road trek found himself caught in one of the heaviest thunderstorms the state had seen in years. Driving a beat-up 2012 Volvo with completely dead windshield wipers, he had zero visibility. He had no choice but to pull off the highway, parking deep in the desert gravel to avoid being rear-ended, and wait for the rain to stop. After 2 hours of total isolation, bright, sharp bursts of white light began piercing the darkness outside his window. 3 silhouettes were approaching the car in the heavy rain. They weren't walking normally. They stumbled and danced in bizarre, erratic motions, sweeping their flashlight beams wildly across his vehicle. Trapped in a disabled car with unknown figures circling it, pure instinct took over, slipped quietly out the opposite door, and scrambled through the pouring rain to hide behind a nearby rock formation. Crouched in the mud, he peeked around the stone edge. The figures continued their strange, chaotic inspection of his empty car. Without any warning, one of them raised a weapon and fired a gunshot directly into the stormy sky. The driver ducked down, biting his lip hard enough to draw blood to keep quiet. When he finally looked back, the area was pitch black. The lights were gone. Minutes later, the beams instantly reappeared, flickering aggressively around the vehicle again. He dialed 911, whispering his location to the operator. The absolute second the faint glow of police sirens appeared on the horizon, the 3 figures bolted, disappearing completely into the desert night. In the vastness of the desert, modern advantages vanish. A sudden storm can disable a multi-ton machine, stripping away your mobility and shelter and leaving you exposed in the dark as literal prey. We expect bad weather and dangerous people. What is harder to process is when the highway itself becomes the threat, fracturing the basic logic of time and space. Driving north from Florida to New Jersey, 2 friends named Mary and Carol were pushing through a straight overnight haul. Exhausted, they pulled off at a dilapidated tourist trap town to stretch and grab gas. The streets were entirely empty, the storefronts visibly decaying, and the whole area carried an oppressive, heavy silence. Inside the first convenience store, Mary bought a drink from a tall woman with dark hair and distinct suspenders. Finding nothing for Carol, they walked across the street to a second store. The exact same woman was standing behind the counter. When Mary asked if she had a twin, the cashier seemed deeply confused, stating she was an only child. Spooked, Mary dragged Carol back to the first store to prove she wasn't crazy. But the cashier there was now a short, blonde, middle-aged woman. Eager to leave, they drove down the street to an empty gas station. They parked at the pumps, walked inside to pay, and walked out seconds later. The completely abandoned station was suddenly overflowing. The concrete lot was packed with cars, lined up as if it were rush hour. Every single person in the crowded lot stopped what they were doing and stared directly at the two women. The intense, unblinking focus of dozens of strangers triggered a primal alarm in both of them. They abandoned their plans for food, jumped back into the car, and sped toward the interstate. Back on the highway, they tried to shake off the strange encounter. A heavily scratched Toyota Sienna minivan passed them in the left lane, its windshield marked by a massive, unavoidable spiderweb crack. 10 minutes of straight-line, high-speed driving later, that exact same Sienna, with the identical spiderweb crack, passed them from behind a second time. Sitting in the driver's seat, Mary checked the GPS display. The clock showed that an entire hour had passed since they left the gas station. They had only been driving for 10 minutes, but 60 minutes of their timeline simply no longer existed. Online forums contain hundreds of reports from drivers who describe these same phenomena: shifting crowds, repeating vehicles, and unaccounted for hours on a straight road. The highway is a landscape where the logic of a map can fail, and a driver can find themselves in a place where time and distance no longer follow a straight line.